A vault buried beneath London, untouched for 40 years, not a single alarm, not a single broken lock. But when they opened it, every bar of gold had vanished. This wasn't a robbery, this was a blueprint for the perfect lie. Welcome to the detective files, where logic meets mystery, and no case stays closed for long. The telegram reached Baker Street just after midday, its wording unusually brief for something so evidently urgent. Vauxhall Treasury Vault open today. Empty. No signs of entry. Requesting you immediately. Inspector Lestrade. Holmes set the telegram down, his eyes already narrowing with interest. It appears Scotland Yard has encountered the impossible again, he said, reaching for his coat. What kind of vault? I asked, folding my newspaper a bank. No. Vauxhall. Government Treasury Annex. One of the old underground reserve vaults built in the 1850s to secure the Crown's surplus in times of war. Most citizens don't even know it exists. And it was open today, and found empty, I asked, incredulously. Holmes gave a sharp nod. Sealed for decades. Triple enforced steel, interior damp protected, and underarm patrol even when dormant. No entry recorded in over 40 years. And yet, no gold. Quote, there was a note of something deeper than curiosity in his tone. It was that peculiar gleam I had come to recognize. The look Holmes wore when the laws of logic were under siege. Within the hour, we were en route to Vauxhall, rattling across the bridge in a hansom cab, as early November fog rolled in over the Thames. The air was damp, the river bloated and grey. At Holmes's feet lay a rolled blueprint of the vault, and in his hands, a magnifying eyeglass he twirled absently. Watson. There are only 3 keys to that vault, he murmured, all held by separate departments. All accounted for. No external tampering. No internal records of movement. This isn't just a theft. It may be the first true disappearance I've encountered. I was about to speak when we pulled into the Treasury Annex. To our surprise, the entrance was not guarded by police tape or soldiers, but by a thin man in a dark green coat, his eyes shifting nervously from shadow to shadow. Mr. Holmes. I presume Lestrade emerged behind the man, looking unusually pale. This, he gestured, is Deputy Controller Merriweather. The man who authorized the vault to be opened today. Merriweather nodded tightly. The interior was exactly as it was left, locks untouched. The gold crates all gone. All, Holmes said flatly. Every last bar. 4,000 in total. He handed Holmes a rusted clipboard. The inventory list was dated 1887, and the vault. Holmes asked who opened it. No one, Merriweather replied hoarsely. That is, the door was unlocked. Sealed, but not secured. The locking mechanism was never engaged. Holmes's brows arched. So the greatest vault in Her Majesty's secret treasury was never locked for 40 years. No, sir, Lestrade cut in. That's the thing. We have records that the vault was officially sealed, keys logged, triple checks signed off. Then, Holmes whispered, either the system was never secure, or someone ensured we thought it was. We descended into the earth on a spiral staircase slick with condensation, our boots echoing. The door to the vault loomed ahead, thick, iron-plated and ominous. Yet it stood slightly ajar. Inside, the space was cavernous and eerily cold. Empty wooden crates lay scattered like skeletons. A single oil lamp flickered above, casting long shadows. Holmes knelt near one crate, fingering the interior lining. No dust inside, he muttered. No oxidation on the bolts. These were emptied recently. But when? Lestrade asked. That's the question, Holmes said. And second, how he ran a gloved finger along the stone floor, then stopped. I followed his gaze, and saw it too. A faint scratch, circular, as if something massive had rotated, but beneath the vault. Holmes looked up, suddenly alert. Gentlemen, tell me, is there any chamber underneath this vault? No, Merriweather said, frowning. Holmes stood slowly. Then someone went to great lengths to make it seem that way. He turned toward me with a rare chill in his voice. Watson, I fear the theft didn't come through the door at all. Holmes remained crouched over the floor of the empty vault, his fingers lightly tracing the circular scratch embedded in the stone. His brow furrowed with silent concentration as the flickering oil lamp overhead cast a dancing glow across the chamber's cold interior. Lestrade shifted beside me, clearly uncomfortable. You think someone came in from beneath, Holmes? There's no hatch. No tunnels beneath this entire annex. I checked myself. I'm not asking what's documented. Holmes replied without looking up. I'm asking what's true. He rose suddenly and turned to Merriweather, who inspected the vault last before its official opening. Merriweather cleared his throat. That would be Mr. Elias Channing, Treasury Surveyor. He was assigned to do a safety sweep and inventory count before today's inspection. Holmes's gaze sharpened. Where is he now? Merriweather hesitated. He hasn't reported back since yesterday afternoon. Did he have access to the vault keys? No, Merriweather replied. But he did have access to the outer corridors and blueprints. Holmes fell silent. Take us to his office, he said at last. Up 2 floors and down a hall lined with filing cabinets, we entered a modest chamber with papers scattered across every surface. The windows were fogged from within. An old kettle hissed unattended on a portable burner. I noticed it first, a curious sketch pinned beside the desk. A circle, large, precise, labeled load-bearing cylinder 4C. Underneath it, in faded pencil, was scribbled. They think down is the end. But down is only where silence begins. Holmes leaned in closer, poetic. Unstable. Possibly genius. Or completely mad. He moved toward the desk, picking up a small booklet marked Maintenance Log. Restricted Wing. He flipped to the last entry. The ink was smudged, but legible. October 31st. Heard something beneath the floor again. Like groaning metal. But vault shows no pressure change. Either the supports are crying, or something's breathing beneath us. Watson's voice dropped. That sounds deliberate. Holmes finished and timed. He moved to the far wall, where several old maps of the annex were pinned. Look here, he pointed, beneath Vault Room 3, a sealed foundation tunnel from the original 1850s construction. Marked for drainage, but never used. Merriweather blinked. That was supposed to be filled in decades ago. Supposed to be, Holmes echoed. We followed him down again, past the main staircase and through an old maintenance corridor that smelled of mildew and rust. At the end, a rusted grate was bolted over a set of bricks unlike the rest of the wall. Holmes struck the bricks lightly with the handle of his cane. They rang hollow. He smiled. Watson, help me with this with a bit of effort. And Lestrade's crowbar. We pried away the facade. Behind it was a circular shaft wide enough for a man to descend. A ladder of steel rungs led downward into shadow. A gust of cold air rose to meet us, carrying the faint scent of oil, dust, and something metallic. Holmes turned to us, his face calm, his voice cool. They didn't open the vault from the front. They built a second entrance from beneath, years ago. This was a long game, gentlemen. Lestrade's eyes widened. A tunnel heist. 40 years in the making. No, Holmes replied, 40 years in the waiting. The heist was recent. The plan, however, may be older than any of us realize, and without waiting for reply, he gripped the ladder and vanished into the dark. The air grew colder with every rung. As I descended behind Holmes, the only sounds were the creak of the metal ladder and the soft hiss of moisture dripping from unseen cracks. Lestrade followed hesitantly, the light from his lantern casting warped shadows against the narrow shaft. At last, Holmes's feet touched ground. We emerged into a narrow corridor of stone and iron, its ceiling low and curved. The walls bore the marks of ancient picks and soot, a forgotten access tunnel likely carved by Victorian engineers during the early days of London's underground expansion. It's not on any current map, I murmured, precisely why it's useful. Holmes replied, brushing a spiderweb from his sleeve. The most successful crimes are built atop the blind spots of bureaucracy. We walked in silence for several minutes. The tunnel curved gently, with old wooden beams supporting the roof every 15 feet. Then, we found the first sign of something recent. An oil can, half empty. Fresh. Holmes bent to examine it. Non-industrial. Recently handled. No rust on the cap. Could be a workman, Lestrade offered, though his tone lacked conviction. Holmes didn't answer. He turned instead to the wall, and pressed his ear against the damp stone. He listened, then took 3 steps forward, repeated the act, and finally knelt beside a junction where 2 beams intersected. He knocked lightly. A hollow sound, responded Watson. Hand me that lantern. I passed it forward. Holmes held it low, revealing a metal ring embedded in the dirt floor, hidden beneath scattered debris. He hooked his cane into it and pulled. A concealed hatch lifted with a groan of ancient hinges. Below it, another chamber, octagonal, lined with riveted metal and partially filled with old crates. Holmes climbed down and held up the lantern. The glow revealed drag marks across the dusty floor, wide, parallel, as if something heavy had been slid across it repeatedly. More intriguing still, one wall of the chamber had been deliberately gutted. The rivets along its edge had been unscrewed and left in a neat pile. This, Holmes whispered, is where the vault floor was breached. But the vault showed no sign of entry. Lestrade protested from above. Holmes ran a hand over the exposed steel plate. That's because the breach wasn't external. It was under the crate platform. The floor inside the vault wasn't fixed. It was designed to pivot. The thieves accessed the gold from here and lifted it away without ever opening the door. But how could they move so much weight, I asked. Holmes turned to me, and in the glow of the lamp his expression darkened. They didn't carry it. They lowered it. This chamber was built to receive the gold, perhaps even long ago, as part of the original construction. But why would anyone design such a system? Holmes's voice dropped to a murmur. Because someone knew, 40 years ago, that the true weakness of a vault is not its locks, but its foundation. We explored further. In the far corner of the hidden chamber stood a small mechanical winch system, rusted, but clearly restored, its chains recently oiled. Beside it, a wooden crate sat open. Inside lay a single gold bar. Holmes didn't smile. He stared at it like a corpse. They left this here deliberately. For us, I asked. No, he replied coldly. For someone they expected to return. He picked up the gold bar with gloved hands, inspecting its weight. Watson, this piece was cast last month. We all froze. Lestrade blinked. You mean? I mean, Holmes said, this heist didn't remove gold from the vault. He held the bar aloft in the lantern light. It added new gold, and someone has replaced the Crown reserves with fakes before this week began. The silence in the hidden chamber felt colder after Holmes's declaration. Lestrade moved closer to the open crate, examining the lone gold bar as though expecting it to melt under scrutiny. But why replace real gold with real gold, he muttered. And why only one bar? Holmes tapped the edge of the winch with his cane. Because this isn't about theft alone. It's about control, about knowing when someone would look, and preparing a performance just convincing enough to mislead them. He turned to me. Watson, a vault supposedly sealed for 40 years is opened and found empty. Everyone assumes the theft must have occurred during that time. But what if the real crime happened just days ago? I frowned. But who would have had access? And how could they move tons of gold unnoticed? Holmes smiled faintly. That's what we intend to find out. We ascended once more through the narrow shaft. Holmes said little on the way up. He moved with the intensity of a man calculating in layers, his mind peeling back time in reverse. When we returned to the surface offices, Merriweather was waiting nervously by a stove. I may have remembered something, he stammered. Holmes looked up. Speak. There was a man. A private surveyor. He wasn't employed directly by the Treasury, but was contracted last year for a separate infrastructure assessment. Said he specialized in pressure faults and underground shifts. His name was... He paused, searching memory. Carmichael, yes. Jonah Carmichael. Holmes's eyes glinted. Do you have a photo? No, but he was peculiar, always wore gloves, spoke very little. He had a strange gait, walked as if measuring distance. Holmes tapped his chin, walking as if marking space. Repetition. Memory by steps. He turned to Lestrade. Find his registration, and find the plans he would have accessed. Lestrade nodded, and hurried away. Holmes stared into the middle distance. Heist engineers work in silence, not speed. They live off patience. Years, sometimes decades. But they leave patterns. Not in action, but in absence. Later that evening, Lestrade returned with a brown envelope. Registration was false. The name Carmichael was never on Treasury files. But I traced the contractor ID to an old file in Lambeth. It belonged to a man named Osric Vale. Holmes's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Osric Vale, he repeated. That name rings somewhere. Quote, he opened the envelope. Inside was a folded blueprint, not of the vault, but of the sewage system beneath the Thames. And in red pencil, someone had traced an overlay leading directly beneath the Vauxhall Treasury. Watson, Holmes whispered. He placed the blueprint on the table and retrieved another, the vault's original design. Laying them side by side, he pointed to the intersection. Look, here. I leaned in. The foundation support beneath the vault aligned precisely with a collapsed conduit in the old sewage map. An access tunnel, long assumed unusable. Holmes exhaled slowly. This was no accident. Osric Vale wasn't just stealing gold. He tapped both maps. He was mapping shadows, and now we must follow them. By the time we reached Baker Street that evening, Holmes was already pacing. He had pinned the two blueprints, the vault overlay in the Thames sewage schematic, onto our sitting room wall with surgical precision. Red string now connected key junctions, corners, and pipe access points. Beside them, in bold ink, he had scrawled a single name. Osric Vale Watson, he began, without turning. You recall the Waterbury collapse 6 years ago. The reservoir breach in Kent. Precisely. Investigators blamed structural fatigue. But I remember a name buried in the footnotes. Osric Vale, engineer of the original conduit system. He paused, then continued with cold clarity. 2 years later, the Royal Postal Vault at Eastbourne flooded. Another obscure name in the investigation, O. Vale, listed as an independent inspector weeks prior. I sat forward. You believe he's been infiltrating structures for years? Not infiltrating, Holmes replied. Preparing. Just then, there was a knock. Mrs. Hudson entered carrying a folded parcel wrapped in oilcloth. This arrived by courier, sir. No name. Just said it was for Mr. Holmes. Holmes took it cautiously. Inside was a slim metal box, no larger than a book. He opened it carefully. Inside was a handmade compass, unlike any I'd ever seen. Instead of north, it bore 6 strange markers. A, B, C, D, E, F. Instead of a magnetic needle, it held a glass vial with a suspended metal filament and a switch at the side. Holmes's brow darkened. This is a directional counter. Homemade. Not to point where, but to measure distance walked. It resets after every turn. He snapped it shut. Vale memorized entire layouts by walking them, counting paces, marking turns, and building mental maps. He didn't need blueprints. He was the blueprint. We returned to the annex the following morning with a singular purpose: find where Vale had hidden the true exit path for the stolen gold. Holmes had marked 3 junctions on the old sewage plan that showed minor collapses. Not total cave-ins, but partial blockages that might conceal access. The first site was flooded and unusable. The second was reachable, a dry culvert that reeked of mildew. The third yielded our breakthrough. It was behind a rusted utility door, beneath a weaver's shop, half a mile from Vauxhall. We pried it open, and entered a corridor, lined with damp bricks and rotted timber. And there, in the lantern light, we saw track marks on the floor. 2 parallel iron rails, barely visible under the muck. Holmes's voice was soft, reverent, a custom rail cart. Likely small. Manned by one, used to ferry upward into the vault's lower chamber, and then outward into the sewer line. Lestrade crouched, and no one would ever hear it. Holmes nodded. Not unless they knew what to listen for. He knelt beside the tracks and found something. A length of black wool fabric, torn and clinging to a nail jutting from the beam. A stitched edge, military grade, waterproof, but too fine for a uniform. Holmes turned it over in his hands, then smiled faintly. Watson, we're not looking for a thief in rags. We're looking for a gentleman. It was Holmes's idea to visit the Exeter Club that afternoon. A discreet gentleman's society tucked between 2 faceless stone buildings in Pall Mall. From the outside it looked like any other aristocratic retreat, frosted windows, brass fixtures, and a butler who judged with his eyes before opening the door. I need a name, Holmes whispered to me as we entered, and this is where ghosts leave their shadows. Inside, We were greeted by the scent of pipe smoke, aged leather and privilege. Men in dark suits muttered over brandy, while others disappeared behind velvet curtains into private lounges. Holmes moved with ease, his presence commanding just enough respect to open doors, but not enough to invite questions. We made our way to the back, where the club's records were kept. It was Watson who broke the silence. "Do you really believe Vale is a member here?" "No," Holmes replied, flipping through the logbook. "But someone of his backer's stature might be. The register was thick, bound in crimson and meticulously logged. Names, affiliations, sponsors." Holmes stopped halfway down a page. Here, he tapped the entry for Alaric Shevington, listed not once, but across multiple committees. One of them, Infrastructure Oversight, Treasury Liaison Circle. He sponsored 3 new members last year, Holmes noted, flipping to the annex. One of them, under the name J. Carmichael Watson's jaw clenched. So Vale used a fabricated identity, with Shevington's blessing. "Or Shevington used Vale," Holmes replied. "And if that's true, then we're dealing with more than just a heist. We're dealing with a sanctioned betrayal." He stood and straightened his cuffs. "We need to speak with him." "But how?" I asked. "He's a nobleman, well protected, well connected." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Then we do what Vale did. We become ghosts ourselves." That evening, under cover of rain, Holmes and I approached the Shevington estate, a fortress of wealth near Hampstead Heath. We did not knock. We followed the servants' path, across the rear gardens, and toward the conservatory. The glass panes fogged with condensation, and candlelight danced faintly within. Holmes knelt by a half-opened window, listening. From inside, voices delivered on schedule. "The final crate leaves tomorrow." A second voice, sharper. "You've done your part. But remember our agreement. If your name appears anywhere—" "I'm not a fool," the first voice said. "I built shadows for a reason." Holmes looked at me. "Eyes alight, Osric Vale," he mouthed. I moved closer, holding my breath. Vale's voice continued. "The boy in Treasury, Merryweather's assistant, knows too much. If he speaks—" "We'll silence him," Shevington replied coldly. Holmes had heard enough. We retreated quietly into the dark, then whispered, "Watson, the gold is already being moved. The last shipment leaves tomorrow, and the one man who can confirm it is about to be silenced." His voice hardened. "We must find the boy, tonight." We reached the Treasury Annex by midnight. The front was locked, but Holmes knew of a side passage, used by cleaning staff and seldom checked after hours. He jimmied the latch with surgeon-like care, and we slipped inside unnoticed. The hallways were bathed in a dim golden glow from the gas lamps, the air damp with the scent of old parchment and ink. Holmes moved fast, following memory, past the records room, and toward a corridor lined with clerical offices. He paused at a door labeled, "Elias Munro, Assistant Archivist." A soft glow flickered beneath it. Holmes rapped twice, sharply. From within, shuffling, then a hesitant voice. "Who is it?" "Someone who wishes to keep you alive," Holmes replied calmly. The door opened an inch, then, all the way. Elias Munro was barely more than a boy, perhaps 23, pale, with large, worried eyes and ink-stained fingers. "You're Sherlock Holmes," he breathed. "Yes," Holmes replied. "And I believe you're the only person in London who can confirm what Osric Vale and Lord Shevington are doing beneath our feet." Munro hesitated, then stepped aside. I didn't mean to spy. I was just organizing transfer logs from the archived vaults. Something didn't add up. 4 crates were signed out of inventory before the vault was even unlocked, by a code I didn't recognize. When I checked again the next morning, the entry was gone. "Gone?" I asked, erased, as if it had never existed. But I made a copy. He retrieved a folded slip of carbon paper from his coat pocket. Holmes opened it carefully. On it, a crude signature, J. Carmichael, and an inventory ID, cross-listed with a facility far outside London Stoneleigh Depot. Holmes murmured, "Disused munitions warehouse. Converted into a bonded storage yard after the war." "That's not all," Munro added. "I followed the crate code. It's used only once per decade, for catastrophic relocation protocols, meaning the Treasury only uses it in national emergencies." "So this was no robbery," I said softly. "No," Holmes agreed, "it was an internal extraction. Someone filed the crime into the system itself, like a snake burrowing through its own skin. Monroe hesitated again. There's more. I heard them speaking a few nights ago. Vale and someone else. They didn't know I was nearby. Vale said, "We don't need to move it far. Just enough to fake a threat. Just enough to create a need." Holmes's expression darkened. A need. For what? For control, Monroe whispered. Suddenly, a loud crash outside. Holmes moved first, pulling Monroe down. I peered through the frosted glass and caught a glimpse of two men in overcoats. Shadows moving fast down the hallway. "Time's run out," Holmes snapped. "They've come for him." He grabbed Monroe's arm. "This way." We fled down the corridor, through the maintenance hall and out into the cold night, the echo of pursuit close behind. We didn't stop running until we reached the end of Holborn Lane, where a black cab waited. Holmes threw open the door and shoved Monroe inside 221B Baker Street. He barked at the driver, "And do not stop." As we pulled away, I looked back through the fogged glass. Two men stood at the corner, just beyond the edge of gaslight, watching, waiting. By dawn, Elias Monroe was asleep on Holmes's couch, his arm draped over a pile of ledgers, the faint rise and fall of his breath the only sound in the room. Holmes, meanwhile, stood at the window, unmoving, the early fog of Baker Street glowing orange through the panes. "He's brave," I said quietly. "He risked everything to bring this forward." Holmes nodded once. "He's also the key. Without his duplicate record, we wouldn't know the gold's location, nor the motive behind its movement." Which is, Holmes turned, eyes sharp. "Leverage, Watson. Manufactured fear. If the public believes that the nation's gold is vulnerable or missing, there will be panic. And in panic, men like Shevington gain power." He strode to the table and unrolled a fresh map. The countryside southwest of London, Stoneleigh Depot. He pointed, old railway hub. Several subterranean vaults, perfect for temporary concealment. And impossible to access without drawing attention, unless you're invited. Holmes reached for the compass-like device left by Vale, the directional counter. "I've been testing it all night. It's not just for distance. It's a memory tool. Each marker corresponds to a tunnel section, each turn pre-recorded. With this, Vale could move blindfolded through the sewers." "Do we know where he is now?" I asked. "No," Holmes replied, "but I know where he'll be." He tapped a mark on the map. "Tomorrow evening. A private cargo transfer authorized for Stoneleigh. The final crate. It's being moved by Shevington's own security firm. No police oversight. No Treasury signature. And once that crate is gone," I trailed off, "the illusion will be complete." Holmes finished grimly. "The vault will be officially rebalanced with gold from emergency stores. The theft will be buried under bureaucratic sleight of hand." He turned to me. "We must intercept it that night." We arrived at Stoneleigh under cover of darkness. The depot was vast. A series of stone buildings and abandoned railway sidings. Its heart sealed behind high walls and iron gates. Holmes had arranged for a local constable to be bribed into absence. Lestrade was already inside, disguised as a night foreman. We waited behind a stack of crates as a cart rolled slowly down the track. On it, one long black crate. 3 guards flanked it. "Vale," I whispered. Holmes shook his head. "Not yet. He doesn't move in daylight." We waited. At 1:15 a.m., a black carriage pulled up beside the depot. From it stepped a tall man in a wide-brimmed hat, gloved, silent, deliberate. "Osric Vale," Holmes murmured, "the architect of disappearance." As Vale approached the crate, he tapped the side twice, a soft signal. One of the guards stepped aside. Holmes tensed. "Now." We moved in. Lestrade emerged from the shadows, pistol drawn. "Osric Vale, you are under arrest for conspiracy, theft, and treason against the Crown." Vale did not flinch. Instead, he smiled and whispered, "Am I really the thief, or merely the engineer of your illusion?" Then, without warning, he threw a smoke capsule to the ground. The air erupted in a burst of white fog. Shouts followed, chaos, gunfire, retreating footsteps. By the time the smoke cleared, Vale was gone, but the crate remained. Holmes pried it open. Inside, bricks, ordinary bricks, stacked and dusted with golden paint. A decoy. Lestrade looked stunned. Then where's the real shipment? Holmes turned slowly, eyes narrowing. Gone, hours ago. This was the dummy cart, a distraction. The true cargo left before we even arrived. The depot was silent again. No more wheels on rails, no more footsteps echoing between the stone sheds. The only sound was the distant cry of an owl and the ticking of Holmes's pocket watch. Lestrade kicked a stone in frustration. We had him. We had the crate. And still, he escapes. He didn't escape, Holmes replied, crouching beside the tracks. He exited by design. This was theatre. We were the audience. He picked up something from the gravel. A thin sliver of glass, no longer than a matchstick. What is it? I asked. Lens glass. From a torch, perhaps. Or, he turned it under the moonlight. A monocular. Holmes stood and scanned the rooftops of the depot buildings. He watched us. What? He was here, long before the crate arrived. Watching, timing, measuring response. Lestrade looked uneasy. Then, what now? There's nothing left to chase. Holmes didn't answer. Instead, he walked slowly to the now empty carriage Vale had arrived in. Inside, beneath the driver's seat, he found a wax-sealed envelope. No stamp. Just a name handwritten across the front. Dr. John H. Watson. I took it with a chill in my fingers. Inside, a folded parchment. At the top, an illustration of a serpent biting its own tail, the Ouroboros. Below it, a line of writing in a hand I had never seen but somehow recognized. When the empire eats its own gold, the people will only taste ashes underneath. The initials, O.V. I looked to Holmes. What does it mean? Holmes's expression had darkened. It means he's not hiding anymore. He's lecturing. We returned to Baker Street just before dawn. The fog was still heavy, curling around the street lamps like ghostly ribbons. Inside, Elias Munro sat near the hearth, a blanket over his shoulders, reading through another sheaf of records. I found something, he said quietly as we entered. It's not about the gold, it's about what replaced it. Holmes took the pages and read quickly. These records showed duplicate crate IDs, one set for gold, the other for bonded mercury. Dangerous, but not illegal to store. I stared at him. They replaced gold bars with cylinders of mercury. Why? Because they weigh the same, Holmes said. To anyone checking weight alone, the vault would appear untouched. No one checks inside sealed lead casings marked, quote, hazardous. And the real gold. Holmes crossed to the map on the wall. It's gone. I suspect to the continent. Or perhaps further. Osric Vale never intended to hoard it. This wasn't greed, it was leverage. The illusion of wealth, used to keep a government stable or make it collapse. He paused, then added, but if he sent you that letter, Watson, he's not finished. I felt it too. The game had twisted. This was no longer about pursuit. It was about a final move still waiting to be made. Holmes turned back toward the fire. We must draw him out. How he looked at me. We leak that we found the real gold, and we invite him to steal it again. By midday the trap was set. Holmes had prepared a false report, stamped with forged treasury seals and authenticated by Lestrade, declaring that the missing gold had been recovered in a secret sweep near Wapping Docks. The bars were now allegedly stored in a temporary vault facility below the Ministry of Records. In truth, the site was a disused archival chamber beneath Whitehall, one accessible only through a narrow service stair and known to no more than 5 individuals. Holmes had chosen it precisely for that reason. I don't want Vale to think he's walking into a vault, Holmes explained as we paced the chamber. I want him to think he's walking into a mistake. Bureaucracy is vulnerable when it's proud. The crate sat at the center of the room. Inside, 20 cast bars of identical weight and dimension to the Crown's reserves. But they were fakes, gilded steel, flawless in appearance. Each bar was marked with a micro-engraved signature, SHV221B Holmes. I asked, watching him examine the surroundings with eerie calm. What if he doesn't come? He will, Holmes replied. He's not done. He didn't send you that letter out of sentiment. He wants to win. And this is the final act. Quote, that evening, we positioned ourselves in the shadows. Holmes, Lestrade and I each took a separate corridor that fed into the chamber, connected by thin observation slits built into the brick. And then, we waited. Hours passed. Then, just past 2 o'clock a.m., a soft metallic click echoed from above. Holmes's eyes sharpened. He tapped the back of the wall, once, signaling all to hold position. The sound came again, this time lower. A vent cover sliding. From the ceiling shaft above the vault chamber, a rope uncoiled in silence. A figure descended. Dressed in a long coat, face masked in black cloth, gloved hands careful and practiced, he did not hesitate. With a small wrench, he cracked the lock on the crate, lifted one bar, and examined it under a red-filtered torch. He hesitated. Then, he laughed. Not loudly, not mockingly, but with quiet, bitter amusement. Then he spoke, just loud enough to carry. "Clever, Mr. Holmes?" "Very clever." The figure turned toward the darkest corner of the room. "I assume you're here." Holmes stepped out of shadow like smoke-made flesh. "Yes," he said. "I thought you might enjoy our little misdirection." Osric Vale peeled the mask from his face. He was older than I expected. Late 40s, hair streaked with grey, eyes hollow and bright with a kind of driven madness. "It's a beautiful forgery," he said, gesturing to the bars. "Weight, shine, proportions." "But there's one flaw." "Which is?" Holmes asked. Vale pointed to a corner of the chamber. "That vent. You left the cover warm. Condensation." "I measured the airflow on my way in." Holmes smiled. "Then you also know the only way out is the one you came through." "I do. And yet you came anyway." Vale's eyes burned because I couldn't let it end with you having the last move. Lestrade appeared behind him, revolver drawn. "It has ended, Vale. You're under arrest." Vale didn't flinch. Instead, he looked to Holmes. "Do you know why I did it?" "I can guess," Holmes replied. "No, you can't. Because you still think this was about gold." He stepped forward, calm. "It was never about gold. It was about truth. The truth that your institutions are built on the illusion of permanence, that you place more trust in locked doors than in people." He smiled faintly, and I proved that all it takes to bring down the empire's foundation is a man with time. Holmes studied him for a long moment, then said softly, "You didn't bring it down, Vale. You merely proved it trembles." Osric Vale did not resist as the cuffs were fastened around his wrists. He moved like a man who had completed a symphony, not surrendered. As Lestrade led him from the chamber, he turned to Holmes one final time. "Ask them," he said, "what the gold was ever for." He did not look back. The room fell quiet. Holmes stood at the center of the chamber, unmoving, as if listening to the echoes of something deeper than footsteps. Something unresolved. Later, back at Baker Street, Lestrade drafted the formal report. The stolen gold, of course, was not recovered. But the arrests of Vale and 3 collaborators across London sent a powerful message. The Treasury announced, quote, "new security reforms." The press celebrated Scotland Yard's decisive action. But Holmes was quiet. He paced that evening, pipe forgotten, gaze distant. "Something troubles you," I finally said. Holmes turned to me slowly. "It's not what was stolen, Watson. It's what was never meant to be found." He gestured toward the slip of parchment Vale had left. "The Ouroboros? The riddle about the Empire eating its own gold." He didn't just want to prove a point. He wanted to expose a system. One that hides deception beneath the weight of routine. Quote. He crossed to his desk and laid out the old inventory sheet, the forged transfer logs, and the fake emergency protocols. "Look at this pattern. These codes weren't created for Vale's heist. They existed years before I stared at him." "You're saying the Treasury knew?" "Not all of it," Holmes replied, "but some part. A hidden tier, one that allowed the gold to be reallocated without oversight, under the pretext of national security. So Vale didn't create the flaw." "No," Holmes said. He followed it, and twisted it into something undeniable. A long silence passed. Then Holmes said something I did not expect. "He reminds me of me. I looked up in another life. A less patient, more bitter version. One who no longer trusted deduction to reveal truth, but trusted misdirection to force it into light." The fire crackled in the hearth. Elias Munro slept again on the settee, exhausted but safe. Holmes stood by the window and watched the fog gather once more along Baker Street. "He built a vault beneath a vault," he murmured. "What do you mean?" "Vale's greatest invention wasn't the shaft or the hidden chamber or the forged bars. It was the illusion itself, the certainty of security while the foundation rotted. He turned to me, and in revealing it, he made us wonder who else is still walking unseen beneath our feet. 3 days passed. The newspapers were still running headlines. Crown's gold nearly lost. Treason below the Treasury. Empire saved by Sherlock Holmes. They spoke of arrests, of restructured protocols, of public faith being restored, but Holmes remained uneasy. Not restless, not obsessed, just quiet. One afternoon, as I returned from the chemist, I found him seated at the hearth, a single object turning slowly in his gloved fingers. A gold bar. But not one from the fake crate. This one bore the genuine stamp of the Royal Mint. A thin scratch ran across its underside, like it had been dropped, just once. "Where did that come from?" I asked. Holmes didn't answer at first. Then he said, "It arrived by post this morning, no sender, wrapped in wax cloth." I stepped closer, and then I saw it, a card, tucked beneath the bar on the table, handwritten in Vale's looping script. "You were right, the vault wasn't where I found the weakness, it was the silence afterward that proved it. You stopped the performance, but the audience is still clapping." "Oh, I sat slowly across from Holmes. "You said he escaped," I whispered. Holmes nodded once. He allowed himself to be arrested. Just one identity among many. "We've captured Osric Vale, but I suspect we've yet to meet the man behind him." A long pause settled between us. The golden bar gleamed faintly in the firelight. "Not for its value, but for what it meant," he continued. "He left us this, as a challenge, or perhaps a warning." I looked again at the card. Below the signature, something new had been scribbled in charcoal. "The Empire only believes in what it can weigh." I turned to Holmes. "And what do you believe?" He stared into the fire a long time before answering. "I believe the greatest vaults are not made of steel, but secrets. And some are still sealed." He rose, set the gold bar into the drawer of his writing desk, and closed it with a quiet click. Outside, the fog of London thickened, wrapping the world once more in mystery. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to subscribe. More chilling cases, more brilliant deductions, only on The Detective Files.